retro styling and retro image processing options, fast burst shooting and HD video, a tilting LCD, and a great EVF. Let's have a look at the Fujifilm X30 and see how you'd describe it. Hi, I'm Larry Becker. Across the entire Fujifilm camera line, past and present come together in beautiful ways. Classic camera styling plus retro film styles that can be applied to your digital images are combined with a modern digital camera feature set, and the Fujifilm X30 is a new higher-end point-and-shoot that continues that tradition. Let's look at the camera that's a step up from the popular X20. We'll start with the primary specs, and then we'll look at image quality, the form factor, the performance, and the things that make this camera really stand out from the others in the point-and-shoot class of cameras. To begin with, the Fujifilm X30 has a 12 megapixel, 2/3 inch X-Trans CMOS 2 sensor and Fuji's EXR processor 2. And that sensor is laid out in what Fujifilm calls a randomized pixel array, so an optical low-pass filter isn't necessary, and the ISO range goes from 100 up to 12,800. This cool lens cap covers the attached zoom lens that's a Fujinon 4X optical zoom. Now in terms of a 35mm lens, it has a 28mm to 112mm equivalent focal length. The maximum aperture setting is surprisingly wide, and it goes from f2 to f2.8 depending on how much you zoom. There's an exposure compensation dial on top of the camera with settings up to plus or minus 3 EV. The 12 megapixel images you'll get from the Fujifilm X30 are nice. Point-and-shooters will be happy, but pixel peepers shouldn't expect something on par with images from an APS-C sensor like the Fujifilm X-T1 or a DSLR. Those bigger, higher resolution sensors just deliver much more. So the X30 is on par with very good point-and-shoot images, and when you pair that with all the pro and enthusiast features, the X30 will find a fan base, especially with Fujifilm fans. Overall video detail is a bit flat, but the color is strong, and the highest recording rate is 1080p 60. There's minimal rolling shutter effect, and you can adjust most of the exposure settings during filming. Just keep in mind, as with all sensors this size, low light filming is going to be noisy. I found that still images and video over ISO 1600 were noisy enough that depending on your subject, it can be distracting. When it comes to the layout, there's a lot to like. The Fujifilm X30 feels great, and both the thumb and finger positions have a grippy, textured rubber that I'd like to see used by more camera makers. With all the die-cast magnesium in this camera, it has a sturdy feel and a nice weight. And I like the feel and placement of all the controls except the dedicated video record button. It's nested between the shutter button and that exposure compensation dial. In spite of the number of direct access buttons and dials on the X30, there's no power button. That's because the lens needs to be deployed from its full storage position. So, cleverly, Fuji made it so that turning the dial to the starting 28mm position powers up the camera. This is really well done. There's a solid detent at that 28mm mark, so that when you're zooming in and out, it's very unlikely that you'll accidentally turn off the camera. And then storing the lens automatically turns it off. Besides the zoom ring, there's also a control ring around the lens, right next to the body. The function of that ring changes depending on the mode that you're in, and there's even an unmarked button here on the front of the camera that lets you change the function of that control ring if you like. There's a tilting 920,000 dot rear LCD, and unlike the X20, there's an electronic viewfinder. And I'm pleased to report that there's a proximity sensor so that it automatically switches to the EVF when you put the camera up to your eye. In addition to built-in audio capture for videos, there's a stereo mic jack. And in addition to the pop-up flash, there's a hot shoe for adding a more powerful flash if you like. One other thing I want to point out is something that's not obvious by just looking at the camera. The control dial here on the back of the camera can be pressed in to activate various things. For example, during image playback, There's no magnify button, so you press in on the control dial and then spinning the dial changes how much you're zoomed in or out. I guess shake reduction or image stabilization is so commonplace these days that manufacturers don't even mention it sometimes. I didn't see anything in the Fujifilm marketing materials, but the X30 has lens shift image stabilization, and it did a nice job of stabilizing my handheld shots at shutter speeds like a 60th of a second and slower, when I'm sure I would have motion blur without help. I told you about the nice wide end of the aperture range, but you should know that the smallest aperture is f11, so you can't stop down past that. In my reviews, I usually make sure to test the performance of any camera where there's an impressive burst rate claim. That's because they'll tell you the burst rate, but they don't always tell you how few images you can shoot before the buffer fills up and then keeps you from shooting. Not only does Fujifilm have good listed specs and buffer capacity, it's actually better than Fuji says. First, the official specs. The fastest is 12 frames a second for 18 JPEGs before you have a full buffer. One step down from maximum is a setting labeled high, which delivers 9 frames a second, and that fills up at 23 JPEGs. The middle setting is 6 frames a second, and you get an impressive 46 JPEGs. And then the low frame rate is 3 frames a second, and you get 100 JPEGs before the buffer fills up. But I said it's even better. I tested the best quality JPEGs at 12 frames a second, and even after those first 18 shots, it slowed down a little bit, but it kept going. I got 56 images before it really started to sputter, and I was especially happy with how understated their burst claims are. Now, if you know Fujifilm, you know there's a nice big collection of wow features like settings and filters and lots of menus for adjusting all kinds of things. And because Fujifilm's success is built on the foundation of various film types and the looks that they made available to photographers, they've done a nice job of programming in those same looks in the form of camera digital processing. Of course, there's Provia, Velvia, and Astia, and quite a few film looks that aren't specific to Fuji. And now they've added a classic chrome film simulation mode. And while you may expect bracketing on a camera like this, there's more than exposure and white balance bracketing. You can bracket film types, and that's a really nice touch. The X30 marketing materials mention the battery life, and with a small camera like this and a small battery, it's worth mentioning that it's rated to deliver around 470 shots per charge. And speaking of battery charge, this is one of those cameras where the camera is your charger. So if you're like me and you always get an extra battery and you want to be able to charge it while you're shooting, I'm going to recommend a Watson charger for under $20. Since the major upgrade from the Fujifilm X30 is the addition of the EVF, Fujifilm makes a lot of claims about it. They say, and I'm quoting, "This is the fastest, largest, highest resolution real-time viewfinder." And they also say, "This is the world's shortest display lag time of 0.005 seconds. But these claims are actually when compared to other similar cameras in the compact digital zoom category. Don't get me wrong, this is a 2.36 million dot organic LED EVF, and it performs nicely, but I don't think it's the best EVF I've ever seen, since I've used some really nice high-end Sony DSLRs. This camera has fast focusing performance, and it worked especially fast in normal to bright light, and as you would expect, it was a bit slower in low light, but still pretty quick. You can attribute that fast focusing to the phase detection autofocus technology Fujifilm uses, but I couldn't find any data about exactly how many autofocus points it uses. And of course, Wi-Fi is a big standout feature of the Fujifilm X30 because of how well Fuji implements Wi-Fi. First of all, it has Wi-Fi and near-field communication, or NFC, capabilities. It can be used for transferring single images or groups of photos up to 30. You can transfer full-size images or scaled down 3-megapixel images. And my favorite Wi-Fi feature is always remote camera control. And this is one of the good ones because you can control a lot about your camera remotely. There's the obvious focus and shutter control with an image preview, but there's also control for shutter speed, aperture, exposure compensation, and ISO. And the list continues with flash control, self-timer, and even a remote control of those great Fuji film simulations. The Fujifilm X30 is a sturdy little camera with classic good looks, lots of controls, and a built-in zoom lens. It's a great little camera for casual shooting and videos, and Fujifilm fans, especially people who take pictures in sunshine and want an EVF, will find a place for a camera like this in their pocket. For B&H and Kelby One, I'm Larry Becker. Thanks for watching.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.
Scott Kelby here, and welcome to this quick tour of our online training. We have hundreds of online classes for you, covering everything from lighting to landscape photography. From portrait photography to sports, we have classes on wedding, automotive photography, shooting, food, fashion, travel, you name it. The most incredible part of this is the price. You get all of this for just $199 a year, or you can pay monthly for just $24.95. 24-hour a day, 7-day a week access from anywhere in the world. I invite you to join with us today and start learning right now.